Welcome back. In the previous steps, we started defining a counter. When we did a +1, we are able to increment the counter. But what we wanted to achieve was ability to have multiple counters with different values on them. Let's take a few steps towards that in this specific step. Now we have a single counter until now. Let's go and add in another counter. How do we do that? Just add in counter in here. What would happen now? If I go to the My To Do application, you'd see that there are two different counters with their own individual states. If I add one more counter, what you would see is all these three have their own individual counter states. That's cool, right? So now you have the ability to create individual components and include them in a parent component. But what we want to be able to do is, number one, we would want to be able to define a different increment value for each of these. So this one I would want to have +5 as the increment. This one I would want to have +10 as the increment. This one probably +1 as the increment. How can I do that? That's number one. Number two is whenever we click this, we want to update the same variable. Right now we have three different things. That's problem statement number two. Let's start with problem statement number one in this specific step. We would want to be able to have different increment values for each of these buttons. One of the important things that you need to understand is the increment value is not going to change. So once I create this button and I say this is increment value is 5, the increment value will remain 5 throughout. It will not change to something else during the lifetime of that specific component. And that's where properties comes in, or they are called props. What you can do is to the counter you can add a property. So how do you add a property? The way you can do that is by saying counter and say increment by is equal to 1. So I'm saying increment by is equal to 1. There is a small mistake in here. Don't worry about it. We'll fix it a little later. Over here I would want to increment by 5. Over here increment by 10. I can go to the counter component and I can use the increment by value. How can I use that? How does it come in? Over here, the way you can use the props is instead of +1, instead of 1, I would want to display the value. So how can I do that? It's a JavaScript value, and the way you can do that is this dot props dot the name of the property by this dot props dot by, and let's see what would happen. +1 +5 +10. Isn't that cool? +1 +1 +1 +5, nope. +10, nope. Let's fix that right now. You can stop this step in here and try implementing that as an exercise. We have done major part of it right now. I would recommend you to try that as an exercise. Okay, I hope you had a chance to do it. If you have not, this is how we would do that. So now what we need to do is the counter needs to be incremented by this dot props dot by. So until now we were incrementing by what? We were incrementing by 1. Instead of 1, what we want to do is we want to increment by this dot props dot by. What would happen? Let's do, oh, what is happening? It's actually not incrementing it but appending 1 to it. What is the reason why it's appending 1 to it? Think about it. It's actually doing a string append. Why is it doing a string append? It's because we have defined a string value in here. Over here we need to actually define an integer value. Oops, error. Oops, it says you cannot do this. It should be a JSX expression. The only way you can actually assign an integer value is actually creating a JSX expression. So I need to surround this with curly braces. Let's do that and save this. And now +1 +2 +3, cool. +5 +5, cool. +10 +10, awesome. Isn't it cool? What we did now is we are having the ability to customize how much the increment of each of these counters should be. How much the increment should be does not change over the lifetime of this component. This component will always increment by 10. This component will always increment by 5. This component will always increment by 1. And that's the reason why we made it a property and we are using it to set the increment value of that specific component. In this step, we looked at how we can use properties. We looked at the fact that if I do buy is equal to quote 1, it becomes a string. And the way we can assign an integer value is by actually using a JavaScript expression within braces. And all that we needed to do inside the counter class was to start using this dot props dot buy. I'll see you in the next step.